Let's go through what you learned from the Orr testimony and the Page testimony in particular that was just released a few hours ago.
Well, as you know, we've had the Page testimony for some time because that was part of the task force that we set up last Congress. And so the frustrating part of this is that we've been asking for the Department of Justice to release these transcripts for months now. And don't forget, there are still about 70-some interviews that the House Intelligence Committee did, and then you have to add on the 15 roughly transcripts, the interviews that the task force did. So there's 80 in total, and of which you've only seen a couple of them. So as this starts to come out, I think what you'll see is that all of this is unusual. That's probably the first thing I would start with. There was the activity that was being undertaken by the Justice Department and the FBI was, they would say unusual. I would say it would more like corruption, but steps that never have been taken before at the DOJ or the FBI, starting with the fact that they use the counterintelligence capabilities, the capabilities that are used to target terrorists and bad guys overseas, and they turned it onto a political party.
She talks about for the first time that there was some verification file as it relates to the dossier. Now, I would argue that that is a complete impossibility, considering that under sworn testimony in an interrogatory in Great Britain, that, in fact, Christopher Steele said he can't corroborate his own dossier, and it's raw intelligence, and he has no idea if it's true at all. Maybe 50-50. So how could anyone corroborate something that the author of says he can't corroborate? That's impossible.
Well, I think what you're going to see when this all comes out, and look, there's going to have to be more interviews are going to have to be conducted. The best thing that could possibly happen is the Department of Justice to actually take a deep look at this and analyze it. But as it comes to the dossier, my personal belief, now, we don't have anyone who testifies to this yet, okay? But my personal belief is that Christopher Steele really didn't draft most of that dossier. I believe the dossier was drafted in advance by Fusion GPS and other operatives, including Nellie Orr, by the way, which would be the spouse to Bruce Orr, who was working for Fusion GPS. I believe the dossier was generated, and then they used Christopher Steele as the guy to put his name on it and then help to spread it around, feed it to places like the FBI, feed it to press outlets, be the person who...
So you're basically saying that Hillary Clinton likely, well, by the way, and the FBI apparently, they paid... Christopher Steele was getting paid by a lot of people for the same work, or maybe work now you're saying he didn't do. The Russian oligarch, the FBI, the DNC, and Hillary.
Yes, and probably didn't do much. So, we've now, through our investigation, we have found, other evidence that's out there about pre-existing information that is very similar to what is in the Steele dossier. So I would say that Christopher Steele was more of a guy that was just hired to add his name to it and help spread it. I'm not saying that he didn't add something. He could have a couple sources, but the bulk of the information in the dossier is not Christopher Steele's. And in fact, a lot of this comes from work that Glenn Simpson did back in the late 2000s when he was a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. So you're saying this was literally made out of whole cloth and then used and abused by the highest ranking people in the DOJ and the FBI, who also now, we learned a lot today about the DOJ's role in exonerating Clinton, even though there are obvious, even James Baker thought she should be indicted for the Espionage Act. Any intelligent person would notice 33,000 deleted emails and the acid wash of the hard drive and the hammers on the devices. That's obstruction. So those people that put the fix in, and then they began a Russia investigation just days later in July of 2016. 9 months later, she testified, Lisa Page, that they had found nothing. Yeah, well, look, that's that's the date that they're all sticking to. Okay, so they're all sticking to essentially their fake narrative, which is this whole concept that this Five Eyes partner brought very important intelligence to us, and we had to do nothing but open up the investigation. Sounds really nice. Sounds great. To open up, to be the reason to open up the investigation into the Trump campaign. However, we don't have any evidence of that. I mean, there was no intelligence. There's a lot of information out there that tells us that the FBI was thick into this all through 2016, not just starting at the end of July like they like to claim.
So in other words, you're talking about some of the highest-ranking members of our Department of Justice and the most prestigious law enforcement agency in the world, not rank and file, but the upper echelon.
Right.
The
reason that they kept it, they had to have known what they were doing. So they wanted it to be a counterintelligence investigation because it's siloed. It's very few people are read into this. So they were able to keep it to a very small cadre of people, which allowed them to feed all this information in, and then boom, lo and behold. So there were several people that were bringing in different forms of the dossier into the FBI, into the State Department, producing what I would call fake news articles based on the dossier, generating these fake news articles and spreading them all over the place, not just to the FBI, but into the State Department and other places. And if you go back and look, you can really find these stories that look awfully similar to the dossier that were written in April, May, June, and July of 2016. This is even before they open up the counterintelligence investigation at the end of July.
Everybody wants to know, and my sources are now telling me, that all of these people that did these horrible things are going to be held accountable. Do you believe that?
Well, as you know, because I said this the other night with you on television, and that is that we are preparing a criminal referral based on FISA abuse and other matters, is what I will tell you right now.
And by other matters, are you talking about what you're describing here? This is the first time I've ever heard you say that Christopher Steele might not have even written a dossier.
Well, I'm pretty sure that I don't think that's it's not a big part of the story, other than
it's pretty big to me. Now, that people manufactured out of whole cloth a lying narrative to stop a presidential election and shift it in favor of their candidate, and then later use it to bludgeon the one that won.
Yeah, and I'm not lessening it at all, Sean. My point is that I'm making is that it shouldn't surprise us that Christopher Steele was working in conjunction with Fusion GPS and Glenn Simpson. Don't forget. I said it earlier in the interview here, and that is that this story originates in the late 2000s. So Glenn Simpson was involved, working for the Wall Street Journal and his wife, doing stories on Paul Manafort and Ukraine and other types of stories. So a lot of the originations, you can follow it there. Then you can follow it to FIFA. So remember, the FIFA case is supposedly why everybody trusts Christopher Steele, because at that point he was, this operative working, as a former intelligence officer. And if you look at Glenn Simpson's testimony, he worked with Christopher Steele then. Bruce Orr was involved in that. If you look at Bruce Orr's testimony, so all these characters are together in FIFA, and then all they did, it was just basically a movie script that they just applied to the Trump campaign, and they went with the same movie, a lot of the same characters. But the fact of the matter is, they never had any piece of information.
And you don't think Mueller is going to find any collusion because there was none?
Well, there's definitely no collusion. What concerns me is that really it's Mueller and his team that are colluding. Okay, so Weissman, who's running the operation, this should not be lost on anyone.
I have said this from the get-go. All right, but I want to get back to something real quick.
Okay.
Adam Schiff got all worked up because you went over to the White House. Then you had to recuse yourself. Ethics complaint, which, by the way, you've been exonerated, as I understand. 10 of his office people to go to see Michael Cohen before his testimony. And I believe that he himself has told lies to the American people, and you know what he knew, and he did it anyway to advance the false narrative. Is that true?
Yeah, well, remember, it was right at 2 years ago. Every left-wing organization in America, including all the media, started, just pouring gasoline, for lack of a better term, all over me with fake news stories. And then they came out and said that I disclosed something to the White House. So I did the honorable thing, and I said, look, there was no information disclosed. Why don't you guys just take a look at this if you want to? That's fine. So the ethics committee was supposed to just look at this and dismiss it. Well, the fact of the matter is that then it became political, and it got held up for 8 months, even though they had absolutely no shred of evidence ever that I had disclosed anything. And so then you fast forward, and you look at you look at what's happening today, and the fact of this is witness tampering, okay? Witness coaching. I mean, that's
exactly
what they're doing here. Now, that's not illegal in the legislative sense. There's nothing illegal that Schiff did or his people, but it sure doesn't. It looks ridiculous, right? I mean, if we had done that over the last couple of years, they would have been calling for all of us to be removed from the House Intelligence Committee.
Wow. This is mind-numbing. All right, Devin Nunes, you've been a rock star in all this, and you've taken a lot of heat. And if it wasn't for you, now Doug Collins, Ed Meadows, and Jordan, and Ratcliffe, and a few others, we'd never be here. And this
every day we bust out another brick. So we're gonna, we're hoping to.
All right,
get
last
criminal
question.
Referral.
How much more information we got the Lisa Page testimony today? How much more out there is there that? Give me is it massive amounts of information we haven't gotten yet?
There's still a lot. Yeah, there's still a lot.
What percent of the story do we know?
Probably 2/3.
And the last third is going to be the blockbuster.
Well, it's a lot of what you've seen in the first 2/3. So it's all really bad. It's all really bad.
All right. Thank you so much, Devin Nunes.